Second, Sothenes was born a little bit after the life of Jesus. He was a Roman historian and analyst for the imperial house. Again, credible news source, credible historical figure. He says punishment or persecution was inflicted on the Christians, a class of men given to a new and mischievous superstition. What he means by superstition is what we would call miracle or supernatural claim. Here's what was going on. In that day, they began persecuting Christians, particularly under the Roman Emperor Nero's rule. For those of you who don't understand this, to be a Christian was a very painful journey to commit oneself to. Christians, he says here, were being punished. They were being persecuted, right? Why were they being punished? Why were they being persecuted? Because they said, Jesus is the only God. He's the only man who's ever beat death. Because in Rome, you were allowed to have whatever religion you wanted as long as you also worshiped the emperor as God. And the Christians said, no, we won't worship the emperor, just Jesus. They said, then we will kill you. And they said, that's fine. Jesus rose from death. There's life after death. You can't scare us with death. It's amazing how much power is taken away from your enemies when you don't fear death. And people were put to death in large numbers. Christians were murdered. Some were wrapped in pitch and resin while they were still alive. A stake was run through them. They were put in the ground like a torch. They were lit aflame to illuminate state-sponsored parties. Christians. Other Christians were sewn in the skins of wild animals and thrown to beasts to be eaten alive for sport and fun. Some Christians were brought into the arena where the gladiators and wild animals just destroyed and annihilated them for public sport. And some Christians were drawn and quartered, meaning they would take ropes and tie our limbs to horses, whip the horses, send them in 4 directions, and rip our arms and legs off of our bodies and leave us to die in that bloodied, painful way. And what he's saying is this: we punish the Christians, we persecute the Christians, but they just won't go away because they're convinced of the resurrection and death does not scare them anymore. Jesus rose and we can't scare them. And they won't give up their ultimate allegiance to him alone. And then lastly, Pliny the Younger. And again, there are many. I could bring a gentleman named Tacitus. There are other historical examples, but these are a few. Pliny the Younger was born shortly after the life of Jesus. Pliny the Younger became governor of Bithynia, which is in northern Turkey, in the 2nd century. Again, educated man, prominent man, historical figure, not some obscure secondary news source or hack historian. In a letter written around 111 AD to the Emperor Trajan, he explains early Christian worship services. Let me give you some backdrop on this. Christian worship services early on tended to be closed meetings. They didn't open to the public as we do. Why? They were murdering Christians. When they're murdering Christians, you tend to meet privately, right? Because you don't want someone to come in and kill the whole church. What happened then is there was a lot of misunderstanding about Christian church services, and people were wondering, what do those Christians do when they get together for church? Because they heard, oh, they eat flesh and they drink blood, they're cannibals. That's what they heard. So they started doing investigation. They didn't get the subtlety of metaphor. You know, the bread is representative of Jesus' body, and the wine is representative of Jesus' blood. We're actually not eating and drinking human flesh and blood. It's metaphorical. We're having bread and we're having wine, and that's what we're doing. So there was the commissioning of an investigation to discover, what do these Christians believe? And when they get together for church, what exactly do they do? And here is the report in a letter that was written to the Emperor Trajan. He says, I have never been present at an examination of Christians, meaning the worship services are closed, so I didn't get into one. He goes on to say, consequently, I do not know the nature of the extent of the punishment usually meted out to them, nor the grounds for starting an investigation how far it should be pressed. Since I haven't been there, I'm not sure how much we should persecute these guys and what kind of charges we should bring them up on. But I did interview some of them, he will say, and here is what they report. They also declared that the sum total of their guilt or error amounted to no more than this. They had met regularly before dawn on a fixed day. What day? Sunday. Why? It's the day of Jesus' resurrection. When do they meet? At sunrise. Why? Because that's when Jesus rose. And what did they do when they got together to remember the resurrection of Jesus? To chant verses alternately among themselves in honor of Christ as if to God. They open the Old Testament, they read stuff about the Messiah, that's about Jesus, and they tie everything in the Bible to Jesus. They sing songs to Jesus, they pray prayers to Jesus, they live their life for Jesus. They get together to remember the resurrection of Jesus at daybreak on Sunday morning, to read the Bible and pray and worship Jesus as God, because the resurrection of Jesus has forever changed their hearts, minds, and lives. It's just a fact. I mean, the evidence is just there. Lots of eyewitnesses, including those who are non-Christians, who didn't even believe in the resurrection, who say, well, that's what happened. So much so that the alternate explanation that was given by the opponents of the resurrection is not that Jesus was dead and lying in a tomb. The alternate explanation that was given by the opponents of the resurrection was that Jesus died, Jesus was buried, not that he rose, but what happened to the body. It was stolen. That was the alternate explanation that was given. No one even denied in the early days of the resurrection that the tomb was empty. That was just agreed upon. We all know where the tomb was, and it's empty. How do we account for the missing body? So the opponents of the resurrection said, they stole the body. What does that not account for? The body coming back to life. I hate to point out the big E on the eye chart, but whether or not the body was stolen, and it wasn't, but even if the body was stolen, it's alive again. You still got to explain that, right? It'd be like if I told you I stole Kurt Cobain's body. You'd be like, really? Yes, and he's here to sing a song. You'd be like, now that was unexpected right there. The solo, the stealing the body thing, that wasn't, that doesn't surprise me. That could happen. But the singing the solo thing, that I wasn't seeing that coming. That's what happened. I mean, they couldn't even account for the facts. In an effort to cover up the obvious, they said, the body was stolen. Okay, great. Hypothetically, the body was stolen. Again, which it wasn't. This isn't Weekend at Bernie's, right? I mean, Jesus is being carted around by his buddies eating Slurpees. I mean, this is not how it went down. He's alive.